to the stage civil rights activist, scholar, and 2018 Maryland gubernatorial candidate, Mr. Benjamin T. Jealous.
Well, good afternoon. I think it's afternoon. I haven't seen the sun that came here early this morning. It's great to be here with you. My name is Ben Jealous. I'm the former national president, CEO of the NAACP, a candidate for governor of Maryland. I want to thank the host this morning, the host of the reception for me, Ms. Linda Green, Dr. Shonda Macias, Shanita Penny. I also want to thank Caroline Phillips and the National Cannabis Festival for the leadership in pulling this event together and for having me as a keynote speaker. I want to talk today about what we've all lived through and how we get to a better place. The war on drugs has failed us, and we can do much better as a country. Remember a day when I was in college. I was a friend's 21st birthday party, and a round of toasts went up. The first was to our friend for turning 21. And the next, before the glass even crossed the line of my friend's shoulder, turned into libations of memory for all of our friends who had been shot, killed, sent to prison before we even got to college. And then trying to turn the mood around, someone toasted the fact that one more of us, one more young man of color in America, had survived to 21. I couldn't raise my glass on that last toast. The motion cut me like a knife. The notion that somebody thought it was an achievement for a member of any group in this, the world's wealthiest, world's greatest democracy, to merely breathe past their 21st birthday. Semi-reeling, I didn't sleep for days. I ultimately did what I'm still blessed to be able to do. My grandma is a 101-year-old social worker. She's a third-generation member of the NAACP. And she's the griot in our family. She carries 200 years of stories with her. Those she inherited from her grandparents who were born slaves, and those she's witnessed. And I went to my grandma's table and I said, "Grandma, what went wrong? You told me we were the children of the dream. We would be the first generation to be judged purely based on our character, not on our skin color or our gender or what public housing projects our family comes out of. Like my mom grew up in McCullough Homes housing projects, first half of her childhood. And Grandma, you said all we had to do was just keep our nose clean and walk a straight line and everything would be okay. And Grandma, it's worked okay for me, but I don't think it's worked well for most of my generation because we've come of age just in time to find ourselves the most incarcerated people on the planet. And by that I mean Americans of all colors. 25% of the world's prisoners, 5% of the world's people. We have the most incarcerated black and brown people on the planet, no doubt. We also have the most incarcerated white people on the planet. Let's not pretend like this isn't an issue that doesn't affect all of us. Yeah. And my group in particular, young black men, the most murdered in the country. Grandma, what went wrong? She looked at me and she said, "Baby, it's sad, but it's simple. We got what we fought for, but we lost what we had. We got the right to live in any community we could afford to live in. We lost land. Black people in America lost land by the thousands of acres, 500 to 1,000 acres per day, every week, every month, every year, every decade, from the start of World War II till the end of the Cold War. And it's only slowed down in recent decades because there ain't that much more land left to lose. So we got the right to be police officers. My grandfather served as a probation officer in law enforcement in Baltimore for 3 decades. lost the right to live in safe communities. We got the right to send our kids to any school in town. We lost the right to assume they'd be loved or welcomed the way my grandma had been at the one-room schoolhouse, or my mom had been at the public school down the street from the public housing project she grew up in during segregation. And you know, my grandmother's comments just sort of sent me deep inside myself, trying to figure out what had went wrong, and I realized that for 4 generations, my family, from my grandmother's grandparents who had been born slaves just at the end of slavery all the way through, we'd been members of the NAACP, we fought segregation, we understood that it was everybody's obligation to fight for freedom, and we had done better. And then it got to my generation, and it was like optional. Oh, go protest if you want, but you know, we've killed all the big dragons. You guys just got to reap what we've sown. You don't need to fight anything. And well, things have stopped getting better and better. They had gone to worse and worse. So I committed that night that I would figure out what I would fight for. My grandmother made it clear that she didn't think my generation either knew what it was fighting for or even understood what had been gained from it. And I just wrote down on a sheet of paper all the things that made me really upset about the state of my country, my community, my county, my state. And what I ended up with was like 6 things that all looked pretty good. And I was like, gee, I can only fight for one. I've got to be focused on something. And so I just flipped it over. My grandfather always said, never let the perfect get in the way of the good. If they're all good, then any of them are good. So I wrote them all down. And I spun the little sheet around. And I drew a circle. I said, whatever's in that circle, that's what I'll fight for. And when I opened up my eyes, I said, end the injustice in the justice system. And I had no idea. But it occurred to me it worked pretty well in the negative. At least I didn't have to worry about all these other things. And when you commit yourself to really winning a battle, when you say, this is the one thing I'm going to achieve, a little light goes on inside of you. One day it may be so big that when you're preaching or you're rallying to say, you know, that sister's on fire, that brother's on fire, but at first it's more like the old Negro spiritual, this little light of mine. It's just bright enough that you can see the next step. I'm sure those of you who are entrepreneurs have experienced this. No one else, your dream doesn't make sense to anybody else, but to you, you can see what the next step is. So I kept following that step. And eventually that light got brighter. It empowered me to play a role in abolishing the death penalty in 6 states, abolishing it for juveniles completely. Working with the governor of Georgia, a Republican, to help shrink his prison system now down more than 25% in the last 3 years. And as I was preparing to run for governor, it was clear I was going to roll out a criminal justice reform strategy. I'm apparently the only person in the history of Maryland anybody can find who's run for governor and actually put out a strategy to shrink our prison system. It was clear that with my family rooted in Upton, where the uprisings occurred, in the wake of the Freddie Gray killing, murder, that I would put something out there on policing. And it wasn't clear just how far I was going to go, whether or not I would call for the legalization of cannabis. But I believe that it's important to listen before you lead. And so I went out there and I listened. I listened to the handyman who was driving me to the airport, brilliant man, a deacon in his church, approaching 60 years old. Handyman. And I said, if you're so brilliant, I mean, you're clearly so brilliant, and you lead your church, why are you working as a handyman? And he said, well, I've spent most of my life working in hospitals, and whenever the chains merge, they do a background check, and invariably they find out that when I was about 22 years old, a police officer arrested me for having 1 marijuana seed in my vicinity. He said it was in an ashtray in my friend's house, but the officer walked in and saw it and decided it must be mine. I can't get it off my record, and they fire me every time that a new company buys the hospital chain I'm working for. I was just tired of the indignity. So yeah, I work as a handyman. I listened to the police officers across Baltimore. One of the researchers on our team is a former lieutenant in BPD, 15 years on the force, and said, go out and listen to your peers and tell them what's going on with the killings across our city. because they were spiraling out of control. He came back and he said, there's two things they could really agree on. One was nobody was quite sure exactly why they've been spiraling up so high in the last couple of years. Now it's 3 years and they're starting to level off a bit. But then it was 2 and they're totally out of control. He said, but they all agreed that in the last 10 years, half the killings appear to have been one set of marijuana dealers killing another set of marijuana dealers. He said, half? He said, half. He said, they all agreed? He said, they all agreed. Were they all from one neighborhood? He said, no, I talked to commanders across our city. Well, it makes sense. I teach criminology at Princeton University. I studied criminology at Oxford Institute of Criminology. And well, violence in the drug trade is often about territory. And when a drug is easy to source, your territory always gets infringed. And so, when I rolled out my criminal justice strategy, I called for the full legalization of cannabis in Maryland for adult use. If we want to stop the bloodshed that are being regulated by bullets, we have to regulate it by law. If we want to make sure that men like that church deacon aren't relegated to being a handyman, then we have to expunge people's records. Once we legalize it, we should not carry on the books that you've been convicted of something that is now legal. We have to learn from DC and actually legalize self-cultivation of small quantities for personal use. So people are forced to buy from corporations and essentially taxed in the process. We have to learn from Colorado that unless you're willing to reform the police and how policing is done simultaneously, the disparities in enforcement will continue. And we have to have the courage to learn from Maryland's own experience and say, it's time to take the bias out of how these licenses are issued. And it's time to get serious about making sure that the communities that have been most negatively impacted by the war on drugs are treated fairly. See, I don't just believe that we should be inclusive in who gets licenses to own, to distribute, to cultivate. I also think that we should have what is known as micro-zip code targeting as far as work preferences. To say, if you come from these neighborhoods that have been at the epicenter of the war on drugs, you qualify to be an employee, we're going to give you a leg up in the process to become an employee. Because this cannot simply be a case of the rich get richer. I'm proud to be one of the leading candidates in the race for governor in Maryland. If you're in Maryland, I hope to earn your vote. We've never seen what it's like to have a civil rights leader become governor of any state. And I hope to have the opportunity to show you just how transformative that will be. Thank you, and God bless.